What happened to me, I had studied all these books, I had read so much, I had delved into so many areas. One day this voice said, you know what? You were happier when you were 6 years old and you knew nothing. I've told my kids this. I don't care what you're doing. Tell me the worst. You can't do anything worse than I did. I tell my grandkids the same thing. Don't worry about it. You know, hey, I've done it. God loves us.
Our next guest has an amazing life story. He's been around the world as a missionary, but before he became a missionary, as a teenager, he thought he was going to become a professional baseball player. There was mental illness in his family, which eventually caused his father to take his own life. Because of that, he decided to go for a career in psychology. He worked in hospitals. He had what looked like was going to be a very successful life. While he was working in the hospital, he had access to lots of drugs. He became a drug addict before God was able to get a hold of him. Here in his own words is Greg Harrop's story.
My name is Greg Harrop. I grew up in a small southeastern Texas town called Beaumont. And in fact, that's where the first oil well was struck, called Spindletop. And so the town itself started out way back in around 1900 as a kind of a Wild West type town, a lot of saloons and bars and prostitutes and et cetera, brought in a lot of course, musicians. So it's kind of a musical type of area. Janis Joplin is from that area. In fact, I used to date Janis Joplin's sister in college. Weird. She's so different than Janis. But I grew up in a little household there were my older brother and two younger sisters. My dad worked at a large, the electrical company of Southeast Texas, and he was quite high up. I think he was the CFO, the financial guy. And we looked like the perfect little Catholic family. We were Roman Catholic. My family originally comes from Louisiana, so technically I'm a Cajun, raging Cajun. And you know, over there most people are Catholic. So I went to a Catholic school, really good upbringing, very good priests, Dominican priests and nuns. Very dedicated people, and when I was young, I wanted to be a priest. I wanted to give my life to the Lord. I felt a calling from way back, and in fact, I always tell people that one thing that influenced me a lot was the Catholics had a little magazine, and it was these brothers that were all over the world, in all these exotic countries, you know. You'd see this white guy, there'll be all these black people around him. He's in the middle of Africa or Brazil. And something told me, that's what you're going to do. And so as a young man, I would say I was probably more searching for an answer to my life than a lot of guys were. And as I got older, though, as you'll hear, I strayed quite a long way. But my family was kind of a dysfunctional family. My mother was an alcoholic, and you know, of course, in those days, she was on medication, probably Valium, I don't know, and very intelligent woman, photographic memory, and when she wasn't drinking and she was working, she was a top secretary. But she was very frustrated, I believe. And my dad was Mr. America, practically. You know, top of his class in high school, best looking, best athlete, you know, the guy that's going to succeed. And he'd done super well. So I grew up under that, but my dad was a real fanatic when it came to sports, baseball especially. You know, us men, we always try to live our sports through our kids. And so he trained my brother and I in baseball. And for instance, my brother was older than me, and when it came time to play Little League Baseball, there was no Little League Baseball in my town. So my dad went out, got a stadium, got the coaches, got the everything, and built a stadium, and put everything all together. And then we had Little League Baseball in Beaumont, Texas. That was my dad. My dad was what you would call the ultra perfectionist. He was a very good man, but he was very focused on certain things, and he tended to see everything you did wrong. So when I played a game in baseball, if you hit, you get a base hit every other time, that's unbelievable. And even if you get a base hit once out of 3 times, that's really good. I would go 3 for 4. He wouldn't say a word about all the base hits I got. He would say, in the 3rd inning you did this, 4th inning you did that. You hitched, and you shouldn't have done that. You weren't looking, blah, blah, blah. So he was a great coach. But when your dad is that intense, it kind of really puts a lot of pressure on you. So I was very nervous type of kid. I had ulcers in my throat a lot. I'd have to go to the doctors, and just different stuff. And then at home, I didn't realize my mom had a problem until I was about 10 years old, 10 or 11. And I noticed her. She had a little sewing porch right next to my room, and I'd see her go in there, and sometimes I'd see her with a bottle or something. Well, anyway, long story short, Dad was gone all the time at work, and so I became kind of like her confidant. And she would get drunk, and I would have to take her to bed, and I would have to counsel with her. From the time I was 11 or 12, I was pretty much her. When she wanted to go shopping, Dad would send me to take her. But it kind of made me the man that I am today. That's one thing, as you will hear, people complain, or not complain so much as they don't understand why difficult things happen in their life. For me, a lot of difficult things happened, and it put a lot of good pressure on me, a lot of things that I would never have experienced any other way. And through those experiences, I learned a lot, and learned a lot about people. As time went on, I went into high school. My brother at this time was playing baseball at Sam Houston State in Huntsville, Texas, and they had a very good team, and he made All-American first team. He got drafted by the Kansas City Athletics, and so he began a professional baseball career. And of course, that's what I wanted too. And of course, my dad wanted. But my dad was kind of like the first boy, he kind of put everything in there, and I was always Pat Harrop's little brother, that type of thing. But I know, especially now, as you age, you start looking back and you go, I wonder why that happened. And now I can really see why I went through these different things. So the Vietnam War was coming. In fact, it had already started. And so my dad and my brother said, well, what are you going to do? Because if you just don't do anything, they're going to draft you. And I knew nothing about the Vietnam War. I didn't know where Vietnam was. I mean, a little kid from Southeast Texas, in those days, it was kind of like, are you kidding? Where is this place, right? And it wasn't so much I was for or against the war. I just didn't want to waste time so I could play college baseball and eventually play pro baseball. That was my thing. But all through this time, I was kind of a nerd type of guy. I mean, I was either playing sports, or I was reading, or I was watching movies. That's all I did. That's all I did. And so I believe it was kind of like my escape because of everything that was going on. My father and mother didn't get along very well. It was a very quiet, steaming situation, kind of like the plate was hot, but the fire was underneath and people didn't see it. My father was very introverted, very quiet. I believe he had a lot of pent-up things that were going on in his life. He was getting pressured that he was going to have to take over, he was going to be the CEO of this big company. He was diagnosed as bipolar. And of course, they didn't know what bipolar was in those days. It was called manic depressive. And so anyway, I decided that I would go into the Marine Corps. Because by going into the Marine Corps, I could serve 6 months, and for 5.5 years, I would go to meetings and do training and summer camps and all this kind of stuff, and still be able to go to college and play baseball. And so next thing I knew, I was on my way to Parris Island, South Carolina. And I'm telling you, this was, if people tell you Marine Corps training is tough, it's, especially for Vietnam, they were getting guys ready to go to Nam. And it was very physical. I was a really good in shape jock, but it was really hard for me. I mean, some of the things we had to go through, you know, you got up at 4:30 in the morning, and the drill instructors were very physical. They beat you quite a lot, hit you in the face, kicked you, did all this kind of stuff to get you to do what they wanted to do. And we started with 80 guys in my platoon, and 45 made it. That's how many dropped out. Anyway, I went through the Marine Corps and I graduated, and I went back home, and I enrolled at Lamar, what used to be Lamar Tech, which is a technical college. I was interested in mathematics, and I wanted to be an engineer, I thought. And so I enrolled and, you know, started the courses, and they had a baseball team. But I didn't receive a scholarship out of high school, so, because we were just a little small 2A high school here in Texas, and nobody really went to watch, you know, these small teams. So anyway, I went out for the team, and I made the team, and I got a baseball scholarship. So I was elated, you know, and I thought my dad would be really elated too, but he was kind of ho-hum because my brother was having trouble in his sports career playing. He was in Florida playing, and that kind of really got to my dad. I didn't know what was going on with Dad, but I could tell something. He went out for a trip with my mom and came back, and he talked for about 50 hours straight, nonstop. Everybody would fall asleep, and some more people would listen to him, and he was anyway. He was really in sad shape, and he was a brilliant guy, you know, brilliant, and but you know, mental disease doesn't, you know, distinguish between all that. You know, it really hit him out of the blue, and so we didn't know what to do. So we talked to his doctor, and they said, look, he needs to go into a mental hospital. So he was put into a hospital in Beaumont. And back in 1965, mental disease was like the worst thing that you could have. And, you know, it was very humiliating and humbling. And he was a very proud man. And anyway, he went in for 6 weeks, and they did this insulin shock therapy on him, which is really intense. And it basically knocks out their memory completely. They can't remember anything. It's the theory behind it was to take away their memory of bad things. It's a nice theory. Of course, in the Bible, we know we can let go of all that with Jesus, but nobody knew that back then. And being Catholics, we didn't study the Word, we didn't study the Bible, but God bless the Catholics. They did give me a basic love of Jesus. And there were some verses in some of their things that I ended up calling on later when I received the Lord. But anyway, long story short, my dad came home, and he was very withdrawn. He wouldn't see his friends. He wouldn't see people that were coming by. Just stayed in his room, and I knew it was a bad thing. And I'll never forget the Thursday night I talked to him. And Mama said, honey, go and talk to Daddy. He's really discouraged. So I told him all the stuff I was doing. Oh, Dad, I'm doing mechanical engineering, you know, and I'm on the baseball team, you know, and I'm playing second base, and it's going really good. You know, I really trying to pump him up, like get him inspired. But he just kind of sit there. And anyway, I stayed with him for 2 or 3 hours. He went to bed. And that weekend I had a training exercise. So on Saturday, my dad took me to the training exercise at the military base, and then I came back home that night, and the next day he took me. And I always try to think back, I never can remember what it was like to see him for the last time. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sergeant said, Harrop, Harrop, get over here, you know. Yes, sir. So get in the Jeep, something's happened at your house. So I get in the Jeep, and we're going towards my house, and I'll never forget, I turned this corner. This is when I really, I used to feel like I was getting premonitions about things, or things would come to me and then they would happen, you know. And somebody later on told me that's the gift of knowledge. You know, you kind of know beforehand. And as soon as we turned the corner, this, I believe it was my angel or the Holy Spirit said, your father committed suicide. Next thing I know, we're at the house. There's policemen everywhere, you know, medics and this, that, and the other. My dad had shot himself in the back in our garage. And my two sisters were very close when it happened. They were probably 20 feet from him, and they were trying to stop him. And so this just turned my world upside down. Sorry, every time I talk about it, I remember it. And it was very difficult because my mom blamed my older sister. She said, you should have stopped him. And so it was one of these things that, like, you know, you have these watershed moments in your life, and this was one of them. We buried my father, and, you know, we just went on. In fact, back in those days, you didn't even talk about stuff like that. I met people 10 years ago that I went to high school with. They never even knew he even did it. And that's how mental illness and suicide and all that was treated. And so that kind of ended up having an effect on my life. Later on, I switched from engineering to psychology because I wanted to understand how to help people. And actually, to start things off, when I was in the Marine Corps, my dad used to write me. Once a week, I got a letter from my dad. And he wrote me, and one letter said, oh, I just wanted to let you know that your aunt, Chine C, committed suicide. And blah, blah, blah. I was like, wow. And she overdosed on pills. So my father's side of the family were a bunch of genius type, German mostly, Irish, Scandinavian, all these northern European countries. But I think sometimes there's you know, people that are very intelligent. Sometimes there's, you know, people say it's close to insanity. But anyway, she passed away, and then my dad committed suicide. And then right after that, my other aunt, was killed by a woman in Lake Charles, Louisiana, trying to commit suicide. So my grandmother lost 3 of her kids within a period of about a year and a half. I know then that God's Spirit was on me and kind of got me through all this stuff. And so my life went on. My mother got worse, and I had to put her into a rehab center in Galveston for alcoholics. And I was 19 at the time, 20. And so then I had my two sisters to take care of, and, you know, get them to school and this, that, and the other. And they were, of course, really going through it, having seen their dad do that. And, you know, actually they didn't see it. Thank God they heard the shot. But it, you know, they were. Anyway, it wrecked their lives too. And I've always said that all these problems with young people today is the lack of the father's involvement with the children. I'm a father of 9, and I can see the difference when I really have been able to tune into my children. And I think that's where all this gang problem is from. Most of these kids, they have no big, strong structure, and the father's got to be there. But anyway, I went on ahead, kept playing baseball. I was doing really good. I was playing semi-pro baseball in the summer. I went up to New York City to play with some of the guys on my team, and I was offered a contract with the Detroit Tigers. And the guy said, if you come back next year and play for this team, then I'll give you a contract with the Tigers. But I was going through so much, and everything was so crazy. My brother had just quit pro baseball, and told me that they cut him from the team. So I was very indignant about professional sports. I'm not going to play pro sports. You're just a number. They can cut you anytime they want, you know. And so I became quite rebellious, and little by little, some friends of mine began getting into the counterculture. Now remember, I'm like this crew cut, flag waving, straight, really, you know, Mr. America baseball player. You know, I was in a fraternity in college and all this kind of stuff. I was like Mr. Straight A guy. And then I started smoking marijuana, and one thing led to the next. But God used it too, because as you can tell the way I talk, I can be very hyper. And especially when I get excited about things, I can be kind of, I always blame it on my uncle, who I take after a lot. And they said he's got the blarney of the Irish, you know. And but anyway, I carried on and came back from New York and played baseball one year more. But by this time I was trying to decide what I was going to do with my life, and I didn't know if you know, pro sports are very difficult to make it to the top. Even though my brother said, "Oh, you'll do great. You know, you'll do better than me." He said, "You're better than me," and but I was very unhappy, and I was, by this time, okay, I had become an atheist. From the time that my dad passed away, it was a big thing in my life. God, why did this happen? You know, here I am. I got to take care of my mother and two little sisters, and you know, I'm not a teenager like everybody else. I was never a teenager. I was a father. You know, my youngest sister later on ended up being bipolar, and later on ended up committing suicide. So I was surrounded by all this, almost like insanity. And I knew that something was giving me the strength to keep going and not worry about it, and just, you take care of your job is to take care of your mother and your sisters. So I got more and more into the drugs. I graduated from college. I decided not to go and play pro baseball. So these were all real big decisions. And I was getting out of the Marine Corps at the same time. So I was footloose and fancy free in a lot of ways. And by this time, my sister, she was only 3 years younger than me, so she was doing okay in college, and my younger sister had already been taken away from us, because my mom was an alcoholic, from the state and given to my brother and sister. So I moved up to Austin, Texas, and Austin, Texas by this time was, you know, I was able to let my hair grow out. I used to have hair, and I had a big beard, and you know, I lived a typical hippie life, and I went to work at Austin State Mental Hospital, because I had been, when I graduated from Lamar, I had a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology, and I wanted to go on for a master's or a doctorate, like some of my friends ended up doing. And so I got accepted at North Texas State, which is in Denton in North Texas. But I thought, you know what, before I get into this whole thing, I want to know, what am I getting into? So I went to work in the hospital, and the first day I'm there, all these, you know, psychiatrists and psychologists from University of Texas come, and they're talking to all of us guys, and they're saying, okay, now they're talking about this, all the amount of people that were coming in, and the recidivism, meaning how many returned, you know, after being in the hospital and came back again. It was unbelievable how many people ended up coming back. They say, oh, in 3 months they'll be back, 6 months. And sure enough, I worked there for about a year, and I saw them come and go. And I started thinking, is this what I really want to do? So anyway, one day I go to work, and my shift was 3 in the afternoon till 11 at night. So 11 o'clock I started partying with my friends. And you know, we go out and smoke and go to bars and strip clubs and take acid and all this kind of stuff. And I would stay up pretty much till 9 in the morning, take a nap, you know, go to work at 3. But by this time, because I'd taken 3 tabs of LSD, Orange Sunshine, horrible stuff. I was still stoned. I was still high. And I walked onto the ward, and there was this girl sitting there. She was catatonic, meaning she didn't talk. She just kind of sat there all the time. She and I started talking. I'd never talked to her before. Nobody could get her to talk. She and I were just talking. And I was looking at her, and I could read her mind, and she could read mine. And I went, whoa, there's something going on here. There is something bigger than what we see. That there must be another dimension that we are not aware of. So I took this one kid out for a walk. He was 14 years old. He's from Houston. He'd been doing PCP, which is a combination of LSD, speed, and some other concoction, and it's really bad. He'd been doing it every day pretty much for 2 years. So he said, I'm stoned all the time. He said, I don't know when this is going to get out of my bloodstream. And we started talking, and I said, yeah, I took some acid. I'm really having a hard time. But so he was 14. I was like 24, college graduate, in the Marine Corps, tough dude, right? And I was really going through it. I was really freaking out. He started giving me some Bible verses from a church that he went to in Houston. But when I heard the word, it was just like, oh my God, that's really true. That's really true. My search in studying was always to find the truth, to get down to the bottom. Why do people act the way they do? Where are we going? Why were we created? These were all my questions. When I did acid, and my girlfriend, I'd come home, I'd be just freaking out. It's like, I've got to find the answer. I've got to find the answer. And so when I met this kid, it was like, the Bible? Well, this started another search. And one day, I came home from work again, having done a lot of psychedelics, and I was having I couldn't come down. Now, I'm a real reader, and so I had probably 150 books on my bookcase, and I'd read all of them. I was going to college, working a job on the side, playing baseball, going to baseball practice and all that sort of stuff. And I would read 2 or 3 books that I just bought at the bookstore every week. So that's the way I was. I just hardly slept, So I started pulling all these books off. Because at that age, at that time in Austin, there was a lot of the Hare Krishna. There were all these guys on the streets, Austin, in front of the university, was like all the hippies. We'd sell all of our beads and candles, and everybody was smoking marijuana. It was like a big, scene down there. And anyway, the last book on the shelf was a Bible. It was a Catholic Bible. Sitting on it was the last book on the last shelf. I mean, at the very bottom over here. I go over, I pick up the Bible. I go and sit down at my dining table, and I just cracked it open, and right in the middle was the book of Proverbs. And the verse said something like, the heart of man is desperately wicked. Who can know it? Oh my God! Did you see that? I told my roommate, listen to this, man. And I read him the verse. He said, what, man? You're freaking out. What's the matter with you? Oh, man, this book, I don't know who wrote this book. This book is right on, man. And I started reading verse after, and everything, and all of a sudden, I came completely sober. And I started reading the Psalms, and I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. This is the answer. This is what I've been looking for. It's right here, man. I said, this is all BS, all these books. So I put the Bible down. I grabbed the table, put it over my head. I walked out next to the street. Okay, John the Baptist, man. Took all of my Bibles and all of my books and started bringing them out and laid them on the table. And I had the books up in the air, and I said, this is all, well, what I said you don't want to repeat. Cars were stopping. I was giving all my books away. This guy came up to him, and it was almost like out of a movie. He said, hey, man, what's the answer? what's the answer? And I said, this is the answer, man. This Bible here, this is the truth. All this other stuff, I've read it, I've studied it, I've been in college for 5 years. I have enough to get 2 or 3 degrees. This is the answer. It's not in those books. Those guys know nothing. This is where true wisdom is. I've got to find someone. So at that time, I wasn't saved. I was still kind of like an atheist. I was right in the middle, okay? I knew it was the truth, but all these forces were around me trying to keep me from breaking loose, right? Well, a while later, I remember this really clearly. I'm walking down the road and I'm hitchhiking to go back home. My car, I can't remember where my car was at the time. And I was passing one of my friends. It seems like the way things work is God brings people across your path. And He always does it for a reason. And He had brought 2 or 3 guys across my path that I never knew before. I met them in Austin. And one ended up later on getting saved and becoming a Christian and just really, kind of like me. But this other guy, he was not a good guy. And I knew it. In my spirit, I knew it. And I was passing his house, and he started getting into heroin. And there was a guy that worked with us, and he overdosed at the hospital. Well, not at the hospital, but at home. He was shooting heroin. And I knew that was the next step. My friends were going to heroin. And I went, oh no, I'm not going to do that. There's no way I'm getting into needles. And I'm standing in front of this guy's house, and I am just like freaking out. God, I don't want to live, but I don't want to die. I'm afraid to die, but I don't want to live like this. I've got to have the answer. I've got to have the answer. And I was just crying and freaking out. And then this voice came and said, don't worry, it's all okay. You're going to see somebody soon that's going to answer all your questions. I mean, it was just, man, it was heavy, okay? So I went home, I hitchhiked back home, and then the next thing I know, 2 days later, I'm sitting on the street in Austin, Texas, and out there with all the hippies, smoking weed, I was in the clutches. And then I see this guy coming down the road with a guitar. And he used to have, his name was Monty, and he was from my hometown in Beaumont. His mom and dad had a little shop there. It was clothes, dry cleaners. We used to see him all the time. And everybody knew he was up in Austin, and he was an acid head. That's what they used to call these guys. And he was a white guy, a big afro, and he'd paint it yellow and red and all that, and ride his bicycle, and he would just be, Joe Stoner. This time I see him, his hair is cut, he's wearing just simple overalls, and he's got a guitar on his back. I'm like, what? Hey, man, that's Monty. But when he walked down the street, anyway, there was a song by the Beatles that says, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I always loved that song. This guy's eyes looked like diamonds. I had never seen him so happy, so peaceful as this. And I go up to him and I said, hey, Monty, man, what are you doing? He said, hey, Greg, what are you up to? I said, man, what are you taking? What are you on, man? I want that. Is that cocaine or what is it? I want it. He said, no, man, it's not that. I don't do drugs anymore. It's Jesus. Jesus, really? He said, yeah, come over here and sit down. We sat on the curb right there in front of the University of Texas on Guadalupe, and he's reading the Bible to me. And I get saved right there. I receive Jesus right there. And he's telling me about the end times. And he said, look at this verse. It says, in the end times, the chariots shall rage in the streets. They shall jangle against each other in the broad ways. Right then and there was a wreck right in front of us. A guy rear-ended another car. Man, I threw the Bible up. I went, man, this is awesome. This is incredible. I said, what do I got to do? he said, look, God's calling you to be a missionary. Now he happened to be with some Jesus people type guys, and they related to me because, you know, they were dressed like hippies, and the thing that got me was this. He's not a musician, at least he wasn't then. He pulls out this old raggedy guitar, and he starts singing this song to me. It was an old Grand Funk Railroad song called We're on Our Way Home or something, and he turned it around and we're on our way to Jesus. And he wasn't that good. His voice wasn't that great. He couldn't play that well. But you know what impressed me the most? His humility. No hippie would ever pick up a guitar unless he was Jimi Hendrix's brother. You know, you never showed yourself. This guy was just saying, look, God loves you, man, and we love you, and you need to come and visit us. And I said, okay, yeah. And so he goes off. 2 days later, now in the meantime, I'm still on my drug thing and still running around with a lot of girls and all this kind of stuff because I knew it was the truth. But I knew God had already told me way before this on another trip I had going up to Colorado. God told me your life is going to change totally. I'm up there driving the bus. All these hippies are in the back. And I told him, I said, just bring me the weed. I don't want to talk. And God talked to me and told me, and you know, three months later, I received the Lord. So I knew all this. He was just throwing stuff in front of me everywhere I looked. And I knew God was calling me. Well, when I saw Monty again, he said, hey, you didn't come out to the place, man. What's wrong? And you know, God's calling you, brother. I needed somebody to poke me because I was so entrenched in my little world, even though I knew it was the truth. And I wasn't impressed with a lot of the weak kind of people that I met that were not really that dedicated to serving the Lord. And I wanted to serve something. I wanted to serve the Lord, but I didn't really know it. Well, anyway, I see him again, and he kind of says, well, you know, you need to come out. Well, I did a fleece. I didn't know what fleeces were at the time. But the guy I was hanging out with, he was also not a good guy. Okay. You just seem to end up with some of these guys some are good, and you just have to really discern what God's doing. But anyway, we went home. We were staying with some girls. We were just backpacking, traveling around like bums, you know. And anyway, he said, well, let's smoke some weed, and I've got some peyote, man. We'll do some peyote after this, you know. I said, okay, we'll see. And so I told the Lord, we're sitting there smoking, and he had 2 joints. And I said, Lord, if we smoke these 2 joints and he falls asleep listening, he had this big reel-to-reel, and he's always listening to blues and stuff. If he falls asleep, that means I'm supposed to go join these people. Now, I know that's pretty over the top, you know. I know I probably, forgive me, Lord, that was not so cool. But anyway, God used it. He smokes the 2 joints. He's sitting there listening. Next thing I knew, I looked at him, and he's laying down asleep. And I freaked out. Oh, man, I was like, oh, my. And this voice said, you better go now. This is your last chance. Well, this girl had this table. It was one of these flat little Japanese type tables, you know, real low to the ground. I had gotten a Bible, and Monty said, buy a Bible, a 3x5. I grabbed the bag with the Bible in it and his address. I jump up out of the chair over this table, and I start running out of the house. And I am running, and I was in good shape. You know, I was an athlete. I'm running, and I must have run a mile or 2. Well, this community that they had was about 3 or 4 miles outside of the outskirts of, you know, on the outskirts of Austin, way out in the boonies. I mean, it was mostly farms and stuff. So I'm out there. I've been going for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. It's dark by now. I can't see where I'm going. And I look for the address, and I can't find it. I go, God, oh, Lord, forgive me. Lord, I can't believe I did this. I know you're calling me, Lord. And then this voice said, turn around. You're going the wrong way. You passed it. I'm like, what? Turn around. I turned around. I start walking back. Now, this is a highway. And these are cowboys and rednecks, and you know, and I was a long-haired hippie. They didn't get to liking them boys too much. So I was scared being out there. You know, it was kind of like Easy Rider. You saw what they did to those guys. So I was a little bit nervous as I'm walking past these houses. And then the next thing, I'm walking along, and I see this house with a you know, a porch around it, and lights are on, and big old Texas house, you know, and I keep walking, and all of a sudden, now I will swear to the day I die this happened. This was an angelic intervention. I'm positive. I'm walking and something pushed my head, actually turned it. I did not turn my head voluntarily. Something turned my head, and the voice said, "That's the place, go in there." And I went, wow, I thought I was stoned, but this is too much. This is wild. He said, go, you're okay. It's okay, go. They had a big drainage ditch. I still remember, I jumped over this ditch. I go up to the house, and I'm freaking out, and I knock on the house. Nobody says a word, but the lights are on inside. There's lights outside, and I go, hello, is there anybody there? Hello? The voice said, go in. I still remember it. I walked through the hallway. There was a couch here. There was a phone table here. And I walked, and I kept saying, hello, hello. I turned into this living room, and there were all these Bible verses all over the wall, like John 3:16 printed out really neatly. And then there was a picture of these guys playing guitar. And there I saw Ezra, Monty. We called him Ezra. And I went, oh my God, this is the place. And I said, hello. And then these two people came out. And I went, oh my God, this is, you know Monty? He says, yeah, they're out witnessing at University of Texas right now. He'll be home pretty soon. Oh, well, I got to see him. You know, he told me I need to come. Well, from that day on, I received the Holy Spirit. I started learning the Bible. Started getting classes, and the next thing I knew, I was a full-time missionary in Texas, and then the Lord started calling me to go to Europe. I ended up in England. I've pretty much been all over the world by now, lived in 20, 25 countries. I speak 4 or 5 languages, más o menos, and I never thought I would do anything with my life. Ended up marrying the greatest woman of my life. I have 9 children now, and Jesus has done it all. And even my mother got saved. I led her to the Lord before she passed away. And my brother has gotten saved, and they all thought I was crazy for doing this, and especially my brother. He thought, you know, you're leaving everything behind for this. You could be a pro baseball player, you could get your doctorate in psychology, you could do all this stuff. And I told him, I said, well, like Paul said, it's just husks. It's nothing. And I wouldn't trade this for anything in the world, and the life that I've been given, and it's only through Jesus Christ and his death on the cross that brought me here. And I'm thankful every day I get up and able to try to be a blessing to others. I love you, and thank you for having me on this program.